Distinguishing global learning from other forms of learning is not without controversy. And so at one end of the spectrum, I think we could argue that if we teach critical thinking and introspective thinking and awareness of others and perspective taking, that maybe it's just learning. But in my heart, I think there is a global piece to it, because I think you could do that and maybe not have an awareness of the world and about how where you're born changes your access to resources. And so I think there is a knowledge component that is about crossing borders, whether they're national borders or political borders or ideological borders.
Learning in general can apply to one's particular or specific context. So it could be a very local example, but it becomes global when that local perspective is put within the context of broader parameters. So if, for example, at my campus, I have a student at Elon who is looking at the textile industry or manufacturing in Burlington, North Carolina, then that is just learning about the textile industry. When, however, that learning becomes more encompassing, how has globalization affected the manufacturing industry in Alamance County, then we're talking about global implications. Also, on the flip side, it depends on who's learning. So if those students are from North Carolina, then that's also very local and particular. When we have students who are from other countries, other parts of the country, then that becomes much more global and expansive.
Global learning differs from other forms of learning in that it focuses on relationships with people from different backgrounds, different countries, different ethnicity, different cultures, and the impact that that background has then on their understanding of the world. Something that's very common, our understanding of how to use water sources or protect water sources might be, and why water is important in our lives, would be seen and understood quite differently, depending on these global or cultural lenses.
I think global learning is more a matter of thinking globally in the context of other things that you're learning. So I think, if you try to react a couple of molecules together to get a particular compound, that's maybe not so much global learning, but anything that you're thinking of that has an impact on people can have a global learning aspect to it.
Often at the college level, at least at my institution, it's easy to focus very narrowly on our own disciplines. And in different fields of studies, that could mean different things, but focusing very much on learning specific content as it relates to your discipline and sort of, going chronologically or hierarchically in terms of building on what students know. But in global learning, I think it's especially important to move beyond your own narrow discipline and find ways that it connects with other disciplines and the way perhaps your discipline might be viewed from another point of view, or how it intersects or interacts with other disciplines. So I think part of it is interdisciplinary, and part of it also is maybe considering the way people who are distant from you, people in other countries or other cultures or other ethnicities, might ask or respond to the same questions or the same inquiries that you have within your discipline.
I genuinely believe that global learning does differ from other types of learning, particularly due to the way that we assess learning in an academic setting. Coming from a previous position in Romance languages, teaching Spanish, you always come into these situations where a student will write a grammatically brilliant essay, and yet the content of that essay does not necessarily reflect what I would refer to as the global learning that we really and genuinely want them to be moving toward through those kinds of classes. And so at this point, right, I think it's just something, typically soft skills, right, whether they can work with other people of diverse backgrounds, whether or not they themselves themselves recognize that they come from a diverse background, and that applies to any and all ethnicities. So that's one of the difficulties, right, of trying to capture that, right? And so for the moment, for better or worse, I do believe that they are separate entities, particularly with regard to how they're assessed.
For some people, it might be just so abstract that it also makes it a little bit less inviting. So if you want to learn about how to make a dress, for example, or to do some jewelry, you just know that you can, that you will see the result fairly quickly in a fairly convincing way. With global learning, you won't necessarily see this result very quickly, or you might not even know that you achieved it. So it's probably a little bit different. In a good way, I think, in a very motivational way.
Global learning is different than other types of learning in that, for one, it mostly incorporates an experiential component so that you actually have to feel what it's like to be in a culturally diverse situation. There is global learning that happens that's just cognitive, just knowledge-based, as there are other courses or other opportunities, but global learning, in my mind, really incorporates that skill and attitudinal development, which is happens more readily in situations of experience, of feeling, of emotion, of smell, of all those kinds of things.
The question arises today that global learning is something unique, and I think this comes from our having focuses on internationalization on our campuses, the globalization of the world, which I see as more an economic, political process than one going on in the academy. So it's almost like the soup du jour within the academy today. My own sense is that as we prepare students to live and work in their world rather than our world or our parents' world, that what it's today global learning will simply in the future be simply learning. I think as we talk about the importance of students having an off-campus, how would you say it? I guess an intensive or an immersion-based off-campus program, that has always been thought to be something that you would do internationally without ever thinking about the fact that you might do it around the corner from where you live. And if you then expand that definition of global learning, then it includes both domestic, it includes international, and then where do you start separating global learning from the other kind of learning that you're trying to do?
As you try to think about the distinctions between global learning and something else, I think that's a rich and open conversation. And I'm not sure that any two faculty members at my institution would quite answer it in the same way. I think that no matter what you're studying, it's always important to think about the larger picture, the global implications. So if you're thinking about a business practice or a habit, or even just a cultural practice, as simple as how groups communicate with one another, there are global implications. And I would say that most of our faculty are thinking about how to challenge themselves and students to think beyond any one context. So it may be a false distinction to say that global learning is something and there's some other category that's something else. But I would say that I think that's a conversation we could be having, and we could be having more deeply to think about the distinctions.